Om Asato Ma Sadagamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityormam Amritam Gamaya Avir Maedhi Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukham Te Namaha Pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality, and reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is echo. My subject this morning is the doctrine of cycles. It's a doctrine that is fundamental to the Vedanta worldview, one of the fundamental bases of Hinduism. According to Vedanta, the cycle is the key movement in all things in the universe. The word cycle means a ring or a turning. And Sanskrit word is chakra, which is a wheel. And you can visualize a wheel that is a round frame moving around an axle. Similarly, it is that nature moves like a great wheel, turning round and round as it goes forward in time, and each of its spokes moving forward and upward and forward and downward and backward as the great cycle of life continues. All around us, we see evidence of the fact that phenomena and events occur in a kind of regular psychic fashion. If we look at a tree, we can see the tree grows, begins with a seed, germinates, forms a small sprout, and begins to grow up, form ramifications of the branches and the fruits and the seeds fall to the ground to produce another seed. The whole purpose of the flower is to produce the fruit, which is the purpose of the fruit is to contain the seeds, which will begin the round of a new cycle of life. We can see life cycles all around us in plants and in animals. Driving down to San Diego, we pass by the Mission San Juan Capistrano. You know the myth, how well, it's not really a myth, it's a legend come true, that a great flock of cliff swallows, they arrive in the spring at the time of the spring equinox and spend the whole summer there, and then around about October, in the fall, they leave California and they fly far, far south to Argentina, where they spend the winter. And time passes, and then around the middle of March, they return again to the mission to build their nests, the whole town, knowing almost exactly the day, what's right around that 22nd of March, that they appear again, the town waiting with a big fiesta and a parade. If we go north, we go up into Oregon, you can see the great Columbia River, where the salmon run down, they begin to spawn in clear water lakes many miles inland. They make their way through the rivers and down Columbia to the ocean. And when time comes to complete their life cycle, they return again through up the river, through those small streams and creeks, back to the riverbeds to spawn again. The whole of the biosphere is made up of such ecosystems, about cycles and circular movement. In our own lives, we can see the movement here, that circular movement, even in our own bodies. Our breathing, for example, we breathe inspiration and respiration, expiration, as Plato, the Greek philosopher Plato, noted there, long before they knew anything about anatomy, that the breath seemed to rotate round and round, as he describes it, like a wheel. Similarly, it is with the blood. The blood in the body circulates around and around through the body, being pumped from the heart, which is at the center of the chest. And like this, we have many different biorhythms and cycles of the physical body that are regulated by a kind of biological clock. And we know how important it is to be in sync with our biological clock if we want to function at optimum levels. In our own daily lives, we can certainly see how we progress through a series of cyclic activities. We rise early in the morning, progress through the morning hours, through noon, through afternoon, through evening, and then we retire for the evening, go to sleep, and rise again the next morning to begin another round. Similarly it is for day after day, week after month after year, that cyclic movement. On a larger scale, we round out a lifetime. We're born and we pass through youth, childhood, youth, middle age, old age, and then cycle down into death and again are reborn. We believe in the great cycle of reincarnation, that there's incarnation and there's reincarnation. And so life after life, that great cycle continues. Upanishads, they say, Yadeveha, Tadamutra, Tadamutra, Tadanveha. That is, whatever's here is there. Whatever's there is here. That means whatever we can see and observe in the microcosm, that is in the world around us, in our own body. Similarly, it is in the macrocosm, in the universe at large. The earth moves in a great cyclic pattern. The earth that rotates on its axis. The earth revolves around the sun. And astronomers tell us that the whole galaxy, the universe, kind of revolves around a supermassive black hole at the very beginning. So there's cycles within cycles. You remember the old Negro spiritual, Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air, and the big wheel run by faith and the little wheel run by the grace of God. See, that's the idea. There's wheels in wheels moving in the universe, in the macrocosm and in the microcosm. In the Bhagavad Gita we read, Ishvara sarvabhutanam hriddeshe junatishtati brahmayan sarvabhutani yantra ruddhani mayaya. That is, as he talks about this whole universe, it says there in the verse that Ishvara resides in the very heart of this universe and makes everything, all of us as living beings revolve as if mounted on a wheel, being turned by the by God who is at the axis. So, this doctrine of cycles, it's a fundamental teaching here of this Vedantic worldview. Vedanta, as you know, is a system. Whatever all of the different parts of a system work together, they all go together. And so whatever aspect we're talking about, this is not an eclectic religion. This is a religion in which every teaching functions kind of as an integral part of the whole. So this morning with our subject here, it's the foundation of the fundamental teaching of this Vedanta philosophy. This doctrine of cycles. It's a doctrine that gives us a radically new perspective on the origin of things. And certainly in Sunday school, those of us raised in a Judeo-Christian tradition, we were taught the theology of special creation. That is that God, that the invisible man in the sky, he created this world out of nothing, and it had a beginning, which is described in great detail in the book of Genesis. In high school science class, we heard a different story about the naturalistic origin of the universe, sometimes called the Big Bang Theory. That is, the Big Bang Theory is all about what happened in the beginning. It's the scientific story of creation. But the word creation is one that really has no equivalent in Indian philosophy, in the sense of something created out of nothing, or something of a beginning. That is because there is no sect or system in India who believes in creation, such as we were taught and learned about it in the West. What in Western theology we call creation, in Sanskrit is called shrishti. Shrishti means projection. Shrishti means shrishti, sthiti, pralaya. That means there's a cycle of manifestation, appearance, and then of pralaya. That means of devolution and of disappearance. And just as the seed grows up, produces the tree, and the tree produces the flowers and the fruits, which again produce the seeds, which return again to the ground and are hidden until the next germination. Similarly, it is with the entire universe, moving in a great cycle, from causal to subtle to gross to subtle to causal. And so it gives us quite a radically different idea of cosmology than we are maybe more familiar with. So, one of the interesting aspects of this doctrine of cycles is in observing the rise and fall of civilizations. And it's a doctrine really which revolutionizes our whole concept of history. And most of us here today, we were taught the prevalent idea in Western thought that history moves in a linear progression, That is, that there is a great line of progress, that it began at some time, and that it's moving forward and onward and upward. And it's kind of a recent idea, that whole idea of history that was invented by the philosopher George Hegel, that the history moves like an escalator, slowly onward and upward, like a moving stairway to heaven. But you can visualize that stairway. It has a beginning, and then you move up the top, it has the end. Alpha to the Omega. And there are many philosophers today who believe that we are moving towards the humanity and civilization and the cosmos is moving slowly, is slowly evolving, becoming more and more spiritual. Eventually it will just kind of go up in a flame of light. That's the greater, reach the Omega point, and everyone will become enlightened. So we can contrast that view, that linear view of time, with the view of the ancient Greeks, Romans, and Hindus, Indian philosophers in general, who believe that in fact there is a period of evolution, of onward and upward growth, of progress. But that's not the whole story. That period of that progression is followed by retrogression. That evolution is followed by involution. And that the entire things we could better call it evo-involution is the process. That's a more holistic picture. And so progress followed by retrogression, the great cycle of movement. When we think of this in Western philosophy, this linear view of time, it kind of gives us a myopic view of the history of civilizations and the growth and evolution of civilizations. And we kind of tend to think of, well, yes, what we call civilization, well, it began like maybe 3,000 years ago. And before that, people were just cavemen or primitive. And, but according to this doctrine of cyclic view of evolution and of the cosmos and of civilizations, according to this point of view, that is the Eastern point of view, this civilization today is just the latest of an ongoing series of civilizations that came before us, that rose and fell. And just as those civilizations appeared causal, subtle, achieved manifestation, and in the great cycle they disappeared from history, as it were, so too our civilization will grow, mature, decline, and then disappear from history. And maybe some of you are familiar with that famous book on history by Oswald Spengler. The title was The Decline of the West, where he kind of suggested what it was at that time a kind of an original idea that civilizations have life cycles, just as plants and animals do. And that are just as in nature, we can see the summer and the fall and the winter and the spring. Similarly it is if we can trace the history of the civilization, the rise in the summer and the fall and the winter and the spring. And so we can begin to speculate on where we are at today in the great cycle of civilization. Just as civilizations rise and fall, so too there is a cycle in the quality and the status of those civilizations. And according to Hindu mythology, there is a progression of 4 stages through which every civilization will cycle again and again. The Satya Yuga, the Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, the Kali Yuga. And in the beginning, Brahma created this world. It was the Satya Yuga. That is, everyone that he created were like saints and sages. And he observed there on the earth that all the saints and sages, they immediately retired to caves in the Himalayas and they began to meditate. Brahma realized that this is not working. So we moved from the cycle of the Satya Yuga to the Treta Yuga. That is, things began to cycle down. And just similar to the Greek idea that there is a golden age, that there is a silver age, there's a bronze age, and there's an iron age. And then after the iron age, the golden age appears again. It's a great movement. It's a cyclic view of history. "1,000 cycles." I'm going to look at my notes here to get all the numbers right here. 1,000 cycles of world ages. Okay, that means 1, 2, 3, 4. 1,000 cycles makes up 1 day in the life of Brahma. Brahma is the creator of this world. Every world has its own creator. Brahma is a person like us. And he lives as we do. That is, he has a day. 1 day passes into the next. And time revolves. So 1,000 cycles of the world ages, that would mean 4,000 ages, would make up 1 day in the life of Brahma. But Brahma has a full life cycle of 100 years. And so many of those cycles will repeat again and again until Brahma grows old and he dies. And at that time that all the matter and all the energy will return to the prana and the akasha and the pralaya, and the universe will become a shrishti, stiti, pralaya, that will go down into the causal state. And after that, a new Brahma will arise. And you could become Brahma. You do your sadhana, and you can be graduated to that state. You can create your own universe. So at the end, that new Brahma, whoever it is, he'll arise. And he'll create the world. Create, of course, by create we mean he will preside over the Shrishti. That means he will preside over the manifestation of the new world. He doesn't create it out of nothing. He's just there to see that everything grows and matures according to its karma. And so we can begin to see with these stories of mythology, we can begin to see the vast magnitude of the Vedic conception of time. And in Indian Mahabharata, we read about some devotees who were on pilgrimage to the tirthas of the north along the Ganges, and they journeyed along the way, and through a forested area. And there, as they looked over to the side of the road, the pilgrims, they saw a sage who was seated under the tree. And the sage, he had a leaf on his head. Long matted hair. He sat there in meditation, and the pilgrims went over and they prostrated before him. So, "Oh, revered sir," he says, "why do you have that leaf on your head?" And the sage replied, "Well, you see, I live here in this forest, and there's a lot of, oftentimes it rains, the wind blows, the snow falls, as the seasons change. And so I keep this leaf on my head to kind of protect me from the elements." And the devotees asked him, well, why don't you build a little hut here? Why don't you build a little shelter here so that you can have better protection from the elements, from the wind and the rain? And he said, no, I can't do that. I don't have time. I have very little time left. I have to do sadhana. I have to spend my whole time in meditation. "Oh, really?" they said. "Well, you're a sage. You must have deep knowledge of the past and the future. You must know how many years, how much time do you have left in your life?" He says, "Yes, I know." He says, I have as many years left as I have hairs on my body." And the devotees look closer at him and they see he's a very hairy man. His whole body is covered with hairs. And he has millions of hairs on his head. And so they asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "My name is Lomarsha, the hairy one." You see, Lomarsha, he's the Indian ideal of the sage who views life as the Western philosopher Spinoza advises us to live our lives under the aspect of eternity. That means to see things in the light of eternity. And so Lomarsha, seeing things in the light of eternity, saw that he had only no time left at all. Even though there were thousands of years left he had, to him it was just a moment. He couldn't take time out. See, the relativity. You see that kind of interesting perspective here on time and relativity. This doctrine of reincarnation has interesting, it kind of raises some interesting questions about the nature of cyclic time. The word cycle, it means a ring or a turning. We know that a circle, as it moves forward and onward, eventually returns to its origin. And even a straight line, so we're told by physicists, we're told that even if a straight line infinitely projected eventually becomes a circle. That being the case, it's reasonable to assume that history also, as it's onward, moving, progressing, onward and onward, will eventually return and to repeat itself. And certainly in our observation of world events, we can see in our own experience that certain cyclic movements of history seem to repeat. I think we've all experienced that to some extent, and like our days and our weeks repeat as we discussed here, but we know that we don't think, it doesn't repeat exactly. And therefore in Western occultism, the idea of this cycle, they view history as not as a linear process, but as a cyclic process. But they visualize it, that is, Western occultism views historical process as a spiral. That is, it's circular, but it's also linear. And so we can see that it's basically, although it's a variation on the linear thesis, basically it's the same story, that even the spiral, it will eventually return and return again to repeat itself. And so too we can see, if the universal law holds true, that everything moves in the great movement of the cycles, that time itself and history itself must eventually repeat itself exactly as before. And this suggests to us the possibility that we've been here before. And maybe some people have experiences of deja vu, as if it has all happened before. Well, one of the interesting advantages of this worldview is that it helps us to understand and position ourselves when we're thinking now. Let's forget about these cosmic questions. We'll think about our own personal growth, our own spiritual progress. This view helps us to kind of begin to think about where we are in the cycle of our personal and spiritual growth. You know that maybe if you go into your laundry room and you see that the clothes are being washed, well, you know, you wonder how much longer they have will have to wait. Well, of course, you know that the washing machine goes through a cycle, and that it begins with the water comes in, it soaks, it washes, and then it rinses, and it goes to the spin dry. And if you look closely at the dial there on your washing machine, you can see where it's at in the cycle. Similarly, it is within our own lives. If we look on visualize the evolutionary cycle of our own life, and of course we're stepping back, we can speak of life after life, of the whole unfolding progression. We can visualize a evolutionary clock beginning at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. During the first half of that period, we visualize the hands of that analog clock there moving slowly, continuously forward. And during the first half is what in Sanskrit is called pravritti. Pravritti, it means our minds, the natural movement of the psyche in our own spiritual evolution. During the first half of that evolution, the mind naturally tends outward and downward. During the second cycle, that is around 6 o'clock, the pravritti nivritti. That means begins to go at 6 o'clock, comes inward and upward. And so we can divide that. We've discussed that on other occasions, the different quadrants of our life, and how each quadrant has its own dharma, has its own duties, has its own worldview and perspective. Very important for us to kind of know where we're at in the evolutionary cycle of our own life. And so when we do introspection, we begin to become more keenly aware of the cycles in our behavior. As spiritual aspirants, we become more acutely aware of these cycles as habits. They're good habits and they're bad habits. And as spiritual aspirants, perhaps we're much more concerned and focused with dealing with the bad habits. That means with all of our negative behavior patterns and compulsions and addictions, what Dr. Sigmund Freud called repetition compulsion. That's the cycle of our life. And we want to break free. We want to get free from that cyclic movement. If we were to analyze our lives as a novelist, maybe you could see your life. If you could go back and see in your life, you would begin to realize that much of your life is moved in circles. And your story is very much a endless cyclic story. It was a dark and stormy night, and the cowboys were sitting around the fire. And one of the cowboys asked the foreman to tell them a story. The foreman smiled and he lit his pipe and he began. It was a dark and stormy night, and the cowboys were sitting around the fire. So like that great cycle of story. It goes round and round and round. And so you may smile to hear such a story, but the fact is that, as we've discussed on other occasions, if we examine ourselves, and we examine in particular the psychodynamics of karma, that means our everyday activities, we'll see that karmic activity means self-conscious, volitional action. Every action that we do in thought, in speech, or in our behavior is cyclic in nature. That is, it's prompt. We have a desire to do something. We're motivated to do something. We act. It leaves an impression on the psyche. The psyche goes down to the causal state. When again we are in that situation that we were before, that samskara in the psyche will, like a ghost, manifest itself. The desire will rise in our mind to repeat the same that we did before. That's repetition compulsion. The samskaras give rise to the desire prompts the action leaves the impression, and thus we begin again around and round what we could call the vicious circle of karma. This is our predicament, that we're caught here in the vicious circles of karma. And contemplating this predicament, it kind of begins to give us some detachment and some feeling of renunciation. The more that we become aware of the repetitive patterns in our lives, the more that we begin to feel a kind of a feeling of detachment and renunciation. The goal of spiritual life is to attain moksha. Moksha means freedom. Particularly, moksha means spiritual freedom. And that's the goal and purpose of our spiritual life, is to attain that freedom. But sometimes people ask, well, yeah, freedom from what? You say, in order to appreciate the answer, in order to appreciate the goal, you have to understand the problem. What is the problem? What are we trying to get free from? Well, we're trying to, this, as we're saying, in this context, we're speaking, we're trying to free ourselves from the great wheel of transmigration. The great cycle, endless, vicious cycles of karma, which are like links in chains that binds us. That's what binds us to this world. It's called samsara. Samsara means changing, round and round we go on that wheel of birth and death. That is the purpose of spiritual life, is to achieve liberation. Maybe some of you remember the old-fashioned musical carousel that sometimes used to be popular at carnivals. And children had great fun getting onto that moving circular platform and going round and round on the merry-go-round. And for a while, it's great fun. But as we become older and wiser, then the desire arises to get off the merry-go-round and to stop the world and let me off. That's called vairagya, kind of detachment. And if you go to an amusement park like Magic Mountain, and you see there the roller coasters, many roller coasters, ingeniously designed, and from far away, just as you even enter into the park, you can hear the screams of laughter and of joy and happiness of the children as they're riding the roller coasters that go up and down and round and round. Then you see the parents who are standing there on the platform looking at their watch. They have more of a feeling of vairagya. They don't enjoy the ride, the fun of the ride, as much as the children do. They're older and wiser. And in 1893, Swami Vedarupananda came to America, bringing the love of wisdom of the East, opened the door of the window of the Western world to the light of the wisdom of the East. 1893, he attended the world's first World's Exposition, World's Fair in Chicago. And there at Chicago, they had a great wheel. That wheel had been designed by the American engineer W.C. Ferris. It's called the Ferris wheel. And it was an amazing phenomenon, an amazing novelty. Not only did the wheel turn automatically by electrical power, but the whole of the park was lit up by electric lights designed by Thomas Edison. First time in the history of the world that people had been out at night and they'd seen everything lit up. And many people waited in line to ride the Ferris wheel. And they stood there, wended their way through the line, bought the tickets, took their round on the wheel, and it was great fun. And Swami Vivekananda, if you can imagine, an Indian Swami in an ochre robe and an orange turban, standing there watching this whole movement of the great wheel, compared that great wheel with the wheel of transmigration. And souls get on in the beginning. It's a beautiful metaphor. Souls get on at the beginning, they go around, they take their round, they come off, they're liberated, they go their way, and more new soul, young souls get on, the old souls get off. And so the progression goes on. Meanwhile, we can visualize that project ourselves further than 1893. Many years later, we can imagine a plane flying over, far overhead. The plane looks down from on high, down upon that multicolored, lighted wheel as it turns round and round, the great wheel of transmigration. And it's the vision of this great cyclic movement and our own predicament that is evoked by our study this morning, that means the study of the doctrine of cycles. Om Dyo Ho Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithivi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Saravam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Same Shantirehi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.